Hi everyone, welcome to the Predictable Book Sales webinar with Tim Grahl. I'm Kelsey Nelson. I'm founder of Avasta Press, and this webinar is part of our class projects at the University of Washington Business of Digital Publishing class. We've been studying the people that have been doing incredibly well with digital publishing and book marketing, and Tim is one of the experts that I love to see what he's doing, see what he's done in the past. My own most successful book marketing campaigns have all been ones I've directly copied from what Tim has done. And I've discovered some really wonderful authors such as Pam Slim, who he's worked with, Dan Pink, many others. I'm going to hand it over to Tim, but you are also all invited after this to go ahead and take a look at his new website, timgrahl.com, and you can see how he spells his name on all of our stuff, and go see what he's up to next. But for now, I will hand it on over to Tim. Oh, and you all can ask questions. If you are on the Avasta event page, there'll be a chat roll. If you are on the Google Plus page, there is a little question chat tool, and we will get to them as we can. So go ahead and take it away, Tim.
All right. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to teaching this. I love talking about this stuff, and so anytime I get to talk about it, it's a lot of fun. So I like talking about predictable book sales because that's what we all want. I feel like there's basically three ways to launch a book. You can launch a book and hope that it sells. You can launch a book and pay a lot of money to make it sell, or you can launch a book and know that it's going to sell. And that's what I like to do. I get paid a lot to help authors do this, and now I get paid to teach authors how to do this. And so I want to make sure that when I'm taking people's money, I'm actually can guarantee at least a certain level of success. And so as I started working with authors a while ago, I was looking for ways that I could know that things were going to work, that wasn't based just on the author's personality or whatever book they were coming out with, but something that could work over and over. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background and how I got here, and then share this three-step framework that will build a great launch platform. So, I'm Tim Grahl. I'm the writer, I'm a marketer, and I founded Outthink, the firm that does this for authors, and recently sold that as well. I'm the author of Your First 1,000 Copies, the step-by-step guide to marketing your book. But even more than that, I've worked with over 100 different authors. I've launched New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers, and I just love working with authors. This is something that I feel like is a dream job. As a guy that went to college and basically was trained to sit in a cubicle and churn out computer code, I feel like getting to work with authors is a dream job. And it's been fun because I've gotten to work with authors across all genres, fiction, nonfiction, memoirs, whatever that, any kind of genre, and authors that are big-time bestsellers and authors just trying to get their start. And what that's allowed me to do is find things that work predictably, that work from author to author to author. A lot of the advice out there that I've seen, it has two fundamental problems. It's either somebody just making stuff up, which is actually most of what I see, is they read a book on Twitter or read a bunch of posts on Facebook marketing and then decide that they're an expert and start telling people what to do. Or a lot of times it's an author that's sharing their success story and how they came to success, which is helpful, and they're trying to help, and they do help in a lot of cases, but a lot of times the things that work for them won't work for everybody. And so what I like to do is find these things that work from author to author, and getting to work with so many authors has allowed me to do that. So this is my book, Your First 1,000 Copies. It's been out almost 2 years. I've sold over 14,000 copies. It's now actually just yesterday it clicked up to 250 reviews. And it sold really well. It sold 10,000 copies in its first year, and in a world where books don't sell that many copies, I'm really happy with it. And I was able to strike a chord with a lot of authors, and I'm going to share with you kind of the backbone ideas for the
Tim,
book.
just one moment.
Yeah.
We're having a little bit problem with your video. I can't actually see you. Do you see yourself?
Can you see my screen?
Now I can see you. Hopefully, let me check with the UW students real quick to make sure. Okay, I'm getting.
Were you able to see my screen?
Now I am. We went. For some reason, your website went. Your screen went dark there for a moment, but you're back. Sorry about that.
Well, let me try again here. Can you still see it?
No, now we cannot see it.
That's weird. When I switch to full screen, it goes away. Let me see if I can fix that.
Oh, the marvels of technology.
Oh, yes. Let's see.
Thank you all for those of you watching that are bearing with us for a moment while we get the screen up again. Tim, it's fine to show us without doing full screen.
Oh, I'm one of those perfectionists. That's fine. All right, can you see that okay, though? Let me see if I can...
Can you close the sidebar on the right? Then we will be able to see more.
There we go. And there we go. All right.
There we go. That's nice.
Okay. I still have to have this up, otherwise I won't be able to...
That's fine.
Okay.
We still see pretty well now. Thank you for the fix.
All my cliffhanger slides, you're going to know what's coming. So, anyway, so when I launched my book, I was a nobody, and I started from a very small list. So I had a lot of pretty good contacts in my industry, but I couldn't really ask any of them for help. You know, they were authors in their own right. They were clients. I didn't really feel right asking them to promote my book. And their audience wasn't exactly authors anyway, so it wouldn't have been a good fit. And so even though I had done all of these book launches and worked with all of these authors, when I came out with my own book, I was kind of starting over again. You know, I didn't have a bunch of people that were helping me promote the book. I had a pretty small email list, and it was important that I was able to sell books. So it wasn't my connections. You know, I didn't ask for help at all. But you know, I was still able to sell a good number of copies, and I was able to sell the first 1,000 copies in the first 2 weeks that it came out, which was pretty important. I actually hadn't thought of it, but a few days before my book came out, I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he was asking about the book, and I told him about it and the title and everything, and he kind of stopped and he nodded a little bit, and he's like, "Well, I hope you sell 1,000 of them." And I was like, "Oh, I had not even thought, like, if I come out with a book that says how to sell 1,000 copies, I need to sell at least 1,000 copies. Otherwise, I got to rename it to like your first 653 copies." So was able to sell the first 1,000 copies in the first 2 weeks, and then went on to sell 10,000 copies of the book in the first year. And since my book came out, you know, it's sold the 1,000 copies. I became a recognized expert in my industry. I built a sustainable, growing following to guarantee success of the next book, which is a lot of what I talk about, because even with my clients that pay me to do their launches, I'm focused not just on this launch, but the entire writing career. I look at the entire body of work. I look at the fact that this is one book that you're going to write of many, and so we want to make sure that we're doing things that have a sustainable, growing following. I don't want to do anything that will hurt future success just to get a little bit ahead now. So it increased speaking invites, requests for interviews, consulting rates, all that good stuff. And I learned this, you know, working with all the different authors, and not only the ones that I worked with, but I studied hundreds more. So there's lots of authors doing interesting stuff out there, and I was basically bugging all of them to tell me their secrets. So I learned the systems behind their success and tested the systems to see if they would work. So I'm going to show you the most important ingredient that got me from there to here. And, you know, I promised that I would teach, you know, this predictable book sales, what the top authors do to guarantee success. I'm going to share my 3 greatest myths about social media, and a lot of times that's one of people's favorite things, because I get to tell you a lot of things you don't have to be doing that you may feel right now that you should be. Then we'll go through that 3-part step-by-step system, and we'll talk about the #1 tool for book marketing. Now, I'm going to show you all of this. We're going to go really fast, so take notes because we have a whole lot to cover. So I want to start with kind of the state of things right now. So some numbers to think about. In 2012, so 3 years ago now, there was almost 700,000 books published. Now, think about that. That was 3 years ago. Self-publishing was still kind of coming onto the scene. So we're now over 1 million books a year being published, and the average nonfiction book is going to sell less than 250 copies. And that is, a lot of times when I say that, people are thinking self-published, but that's self-published and traditionally published. That number's true. And most books by far are not going to sell 5,000 copies in the entire life of the book. And our industry, the book industry, no other industry has as many new products every year. And if you think about how many tech gadgets come out every year and the fact that we far surpass them on the number of new products, that kind of gives you an idea of where you're at when you're coming out with a book. There's a lot to overcome. You have a lot of competition, and so we want to figure out a way that we can guarantee success, that we can see that it's going to work. We don't want to do that launching and hoping thing. So let's talk about Annie. This is Annie Murphy Paul. When her last book came out, she did everything she was supposed to do. She was traditionally published. She got it covered in major media. She did a lot of speaking, a lot of social media, and it just didn't work. It didn't get many sales. Her book did not sell well, and so she was really scared because she's already working on her next book and she didn't know what to do. And so that's when she found me, and we started working together, and I taught her the things that I'm going to teach you in this webinar. So our goals is to have that system that works and is repeatable, that gets predictable and repeatable book sales, and we want to have a successful book and books. That's our goal, right? We don't want to just write these books and have them go out into the world and nobody read them. We want to have success. And actually, I was just this morning reading through. I did a survey to a bunch of authors recently, and over and over and over, I asked people what they want out of their writing career, and they want independence, and they want to be able to do it full time, or they want to be able to at least do it part time. They want to sell books, but over and over, what I see is people want their work to matter to people. They want people to read it and it to change their lives, and so that's what this is about too. So whether you write fiction or nonfiction, I believe that your work makes this world a better place. My life would not be what it is now without books in so many different ways. A lot of my favorite memories from childhood is the books that I've read. And so, when we talk about book marketing, I get really kind of technical and I talk about all these different things, but I always like to start by talking about and reminding you that your book is going to make this world a better place. The more people that read it, the better off this world is going to be. And so what that means is it's your job to get your book into as many hands as possible, because that's how you're going to, one of the ways at least, you're going to impact the world for good. So that's where I like to come from, and that's what I believe about my own book. I believe I wrote one of the best books on book marketing, and so when it comes time to promote a book, I'll promote it because I know it's going to make the world a better place, and I want you to believe the exact same thing about your writing as well. So as we go through this, your homework is to find at least 2 things that you're going to do by this weekend. So when we're doing this webinar, it's Wednesday. So you have 3 days to take actions on 2 things. I want you to find something that you can do, that some kind of takeaway here that you can put into action and start moving towards your goals. Now I want you to come up with all kinds of fun things to try, but hopefully that list is going to be really long of some cool new things you can try. But I want to make sure that you actually get started. That's the most important thing, is that you actually start taking action. So as you go through here, take notes, and then at the end, make sure you have at least 2 things that you're going to take action on the next 3 days. So this is Ramit Sethi, and way back in 2008, I got invited to start working on his book launch. Now at the time, I wasn't working with authors at all. He was the first author I ever worked with, and a year before his book came out, he just posted on his website that he needed some help with some technical things, and I know how to do technical things, so I threw my hat in the ring and started working with him, and I got to work with him all the way the year leading up to his book launch. And when it came out, it debuted at #9 on the New York Times list. And I was just floored. Like, I didn't know anything about book marketing at the time or the industry or anything, and I just assumed, you had to be Stephen King or have like these like big publicists or tons of promotion. And that didn't happen for Ramit. He didn't have a publicist. He didn't have major media coverage. It was his following. It was his website, his online platform. That was 100% of what put him on the bestseller list. And I couldn't believe it. Even as somebody that saw the back end of everything that he did, I still was surprised that he was able to pull it off. And so that really put me on this path of wanting to figure out what works and what doesn't. And so that led me to authors like Dan Pink, Hugh Howey, Dan Reilly, Pam Slim, Chip and Dan Heath, and many, many more books that I've worked with and authors that I've worked with to help them hit bestseller lists, sell a lot of books, build their platform. And so I kept on working with these authors, learning how to actually pull this off. I don't want my advice to be, spend $100,000 on a great publicist and you'll hit the bestseller list. I want something that anybody can do, and so that's what we're focusing on. So each of these things, as I went through and worked with all these people, I just kept learning and testing and learning and testing and learning and testing. And I really think this is an important part. You have to have an experimental mindset. That old story about the light bulb, and he tried like 100 different things before he finally got the light bulb to work. And it's like, and we have that. It's really easy to tell that story to our kids, but when it comes to like our own book career and trying things and failing, it can seem daunting. But what we want to do is have that learning mindset. We want to have that experimental mindset where we're constantly learning and testing and learning and testing, learning new things, testing them for ourselves, and then learning something new and testing that as well. And so everything that I'm teaching you today is based on years of learning and testing, and hopefully it'll get you way past a lot of the mistakes that I made trying to figure out how all this stuff works. So I wanted to find what works consistently, and I wanted to find what would work for the little authors too. There's way more authors starting out than the bestsellers, and so just because it works for the best-selling author, it would probably work anyway because they're a best-selling author already. And I wanted to find things that would work for authors just getting started out. So that's two examples. On the left is Daniel Pink's book, To Sell is Human. When we launched that book, we actually launched it to #1 on the New York Times list, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal bestseller lists. But he was already a best-selling author, and I used everything that I'm teaching in this webinar to build his platform the 3 years leading up to that launch. But you could easily say that it works for him, of course, he's a best-selling author. But what's great is it even worked for my little book too. I did the same type things I do for my authors, my clients, for my little self-published 120-page, very niche book, and I was able to way surpass what most books sell. And so what's nice is it scales. An author that with a small book getting started, it works well, and for big-time authors, it works as well. And so. But you could still say, okay, so it works for your authors, that's great, but but does it work for a blank author? And whatever it is, I've heard it. Does it work for historical fiction writers? Does it work for memoir authors? And so this is where I like to kind of go out and find an edge case and find like, okay, who is the person it's most unlikely to work for? And I found this guy. So this guy, his name is Michael Bunker. And he lives off the grid, and so he on his farm there's like no running water and no electricity except for this one tiny little barn that gets a little bit of electricity so he can do his writing. But otherwise, he lives off the grid, and he started writing Amish science fiction. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I'm pretty sure he created it. But the idea that he writes Amish science fiction, I can't think of a more obscure genre. But yet, last year he sold 80,000 copies of his books. And anytime that he comes out with a new book, it jumps to the top of the bestseller categories, and it brings up all his old books with him. So so last year his big book was Pennsylvania, and he sold actually 80,000 copies of Pennsylvania and over 100,000 copies of all his books combined. And he's got a new book coming out soon that's going to do even better, called Brother Frankenstein. And so, if you're thinking to yourself like, okay, I'm hearing all this stuff from this guy and he says it works, but it won't work for me because of X. It's like, okay, I can't imagine getting more of an edge case than a self-published, off-the-grid science fiction, Amish science fiction writer. So this is the same type stuff that works for him. I've been helping him build his platform for a long time, and the same kind of things that I talk about here, he uses as well to build his platform and launch his books. And so the three-part system I like to call the connection system. And I'm going to walk you through each of the three parts, but I call it the connection system for a couple specific reasons. When you think of the two types of people that you need for your platform for it to grow, I believe you need fans and influencers. So fans are people that will buy your book, and influencers are people that will get other people to buy your book. So those are the two types of people that we're going after here. Again, fans are people that are going to be connected to you on social media, or they're going to be on your email list, or whatever they are. They're the people that are fans of yours that you're directly connected to. And then influencers are people that you're connected to that can get other people that you don't know to buy your book. So those are bloggers, or people that have email lists, or journalists, or whoever decides that comes on the Today Show. Whoever makes the decisions for what large groups of people see and influences their buying decisions, that's what influencers are. So you need both of those. You need your own fans that you're directly connected to, and you need to be connected to influencers as well. So with each of these, you need to do these three things. You need to connect with them first. You need to build a relationship over time, and then you need to get them involved in what you're doing by buying your books and other things that you can do to get them involved in what you're doing. So when we're looking at these fans and influencers both, those are the three steps we're trying to walk through. We're trying to connect with them, build a relationship, and then get them involved. And so when we think about marketing, that's what we're talking about here, is how can we actually do marketing, book marketing, online marketing. And so I went to the dictionary.com and I looked up the definition of marketing, and this is what they gave me. The total of activities involved in the transfer of goods from the producer or seller to the consumer or buyer, including advertising, shipping, storing, and selling. Now, I'm not sure about you. I'm pretty sure that's English, but I still have no idea what that says. It's definitely not helpful in giving me any kind of information on what I should be doing. And so I wanted to come up with my own definition of marketing. So this is what I came up with. Marketing is two things. It's creating long-lasting connections with people, and then once you have those long-lasting connections, you want to be relentlessly helpful. That's marketing. That's all it is. You create long-lasting connections with people, and then you do everything you can to add value to their lives in some way. And what I've seen is the authors that are doing this, they're winning. They're the ones that are growing their platform. They're the ones that are selling their books. They're the ones that are growing their career, is they're doing this type of marketing. So a lot of times when you think of marketing, you may kind of get this like bad thoughts or bad taste in your mouth, or maybe you're thinking of like the slick car salesman that's trying to like shove the used car down somebody's throat. But that's not marketing. Those people that are like screaming on Facebook begging people to buy their book, that's not marketing either. This is marketing, creating long-lasting connections with people, and then once you have those connections, you be relentlessly helpful and add value and entertainment and fun to their lives. And what I found is if you do this and you do this consistently, people are going to buy your books. They're going to want to be involved in what you're doing. And so that's the connection part of the connection system. We have to find people, we have to connect with them, build relationships, and get them involved in what we're doing, and make sure that we're constantly adding to their lives. But there's that other word in this phrase here. So we talked about connection, but what about system? So when I think about systems, a lot of times, actually the first time I started learning about systems was my business coach, and when I hired him, one of the first things he did was start talking to me about building systems. And I was like, why would I need systems? There was me and one other guy in my business at the time. You know, I think of systems as like what big companies need, or like the assembly line that they make cars on or something. Why would a small company like mine need systems? But he taught me that systems are simply doing something over and over so you get predictable results. So one of my favorite examples of this is your car keys. So if you're listening to this, I'm sure you have car keys, you know, or house keys, or you have some set of keys that you keep with you at all times. And you probably have a certain place that you keep those keys in your house at all times as well. So if you walk into my house, as soon as you walk in the front door, there's this blue end table thing, and on the blue end table is this silver dish, and in that silver dish, unless my kids have run off with them, if I'm home, that's where my keys are. And I put them there every time I come home. Well, why do we do that? Why do we have this certain place to put our keys? Well, you know, we have a lot better things to do with our time than run around looking for our keys in the morning. You know, we can actually get in the car and get to work and get some work done. And so we want to do something in a predictable way that gets predictable results. We want to do something over and over that gets predictable results. That's all that a system is. And so when we're talking about the connection system, what we're talking about is the idea of having a system that gets predictable results and in connecting with potential buyers of your books. That's all the connection system is. It's walking people down a path to make sure that we're reliably and predictably doing something that moves them towards buying our books and buying our books on a regular basis and sticking with us over a long period of time, so they not only buy our current book, they buy our next book as well. And so that's what this is about, and we're going to focus a lot on systems instead of tactics. So a lot of times when I see things like this, people will teach tactics, and I have some tactics I'm going to show you towards the end of this webinar, but I like to focus on systems first, because tactics come and go. Systems stay the same for a really long time, and I'm going to dive into that as I go through my system. But a lot of the things that you've probably learned about book marketing is very tactic oriented. You know, 5 things to do on Twitter, or 8 ways to tweak your Amazon keywords to sell a lot of books, or whatever this is. And what I've found is they just come and go. You just never know what's going to stick. Social media platforms change. Not only which social media platforms we're using, but the platforms themselves change on a regular basis. And I've seen like people have like huge work put into their Facebook page, and then Facebook makes a change, and they lose a lot of it. And so we don't want to worry about tactics right now. We want to have an overarching system, and then we figure out tactics that will help us with that system. It's like building a house. You have to have the blueprint first and the framework in place, and then you can start making it your own. But if you try to start, hanging pictures on a wall that doesn't exist yet, it's not going to work very well. And that's what I feel like most authors, when they're frustrated with online marketing, that's what happens, is they dive right into tactics, and they don't have kind of an overarching plan of how they're moving from A to B to C. So that's what this is all about. So the connection system, it gets predictable results. And so let me introduce you to what the connection system is. So these are the 3 parts of the connection system: permission, content, and outreach. And I'm going to walk through each one. So let's start with permission. So permission is any way to communicate with people that gets their attention and drives action. Permission is the cornerstone of all good marketing, especially when it comes to online marketing and book marketing. And anything that gets people's attention and drives action is permission. And so let's talk about those social media myths that I talked about, because a lot of people, when they start talking about permission, they start thinking, okay, if I can get this huge following on Twitter, or I can get all these people to like my Facebook page, that's permission. Well, let me just share with you 3 myths about social media. So the first is that growing your following will grow your fame. This is a huge myth. People are out there like trying to get people to follow them on Twitter, or trying to get people to like their page, or whatever it is. And what you see is, in most cases, like 99.99% of cases, your follower count does not grow your fame. It's actually a reflection of your current fame. So if you just Google like top 100 Twitter followers or something like that, there's this list of like the top 100 people on Twitter by their follower count. And as you go down through it, you'll see every one of the people and brands are independently famous. There may be 1 or 2 that aren't, but pretty much everybody of those top 100 are independently famous. So what happens is people hear about them, and then they go to Twitter to find them. So they're not on Twitter to find new people to follow. They find people in the real world, and they go and follow them on Twitter. Same thing with Facebook. And so this myth that like if you can just get enough people to follow you on social media, your fame's going to grow, it just doesn't work that way. Social media myth number 2. There's a way to use social media that works, you just haven't figured it out yet. And this comes from a lot of people are looking out there and they see all of these people that have these huge social media followings, and it's working for them, right? Like they see something go viral, or that, you know, people, they get retweeted 1,000 times or whatever it is, and it seems that social media works for people, but for some reason you just haven't cracked the code yet. Well, let me tell you, there is no code. Okay, people that have a huge following because they're independently famous, and it doesn't really impact sales or anything else as much as you think, and there is no secret behind the scenes code for social media that's working for other people that if you just read one more article or read 10 more tips that you're going to find. Nope, there is no secret code. You can stop looking for it and give it up. And the third social media myth is if I get a big enough following, it will turn into sales. Now this is the saddest part, right? So let's say you ignore my social media myth number 1 and you go out and you do everything you can, you spend money, you buy ads, and you get people to follow you on Twitter, and then you come out with a book and you realize, oh my gosh, it doesn't actually turn into sales. And so I actually have several articles I'm going to send you after this webinar that will go deep dive into some of these things we're talking about. And this is one of them. And I actually walk through and show you social media numbers versus actual sales, and you'll see it's abysmal. And I've actually tested this. When we did a book launch one time, one of my clients had over 100,000 followers on Twitter, and he had built it the right way. Again, he was out speaking, he was doing all this stuff to grow his fame. People were going to Twitter and finding him. And what we found is we actually tested this, and you can test it too. If you go to bit.ly, bit.ly, or I think they have the .com now, bit.ly.com, you can get links like that, or short links. And if you share those on Twitter, you can actually see how many people click those links. And we did that, and we found for my client that had over 100,000 followers, any given link he put got between 250 and 750 clicks. Now, by any measurement, any marketing person anywhere will tell you that's a complete failure. And that's not even buying anything. That's just clicking on something. The average was around 500. So out of 100,000 followers, 500 people clicked. How many of those do you think would actually buy anything? So it's not about, social media is not about growing this huge following and then turning it into sales. Social media is actually more about one-on-one connection, but it definitely isn't permission. It is not a way to reliably get people to pay attention to you and drive action. And if you think about this, you've probably seen this in your own life, where if you say you've just follow 100 people on Twitter, well, how many of those updates, you know, in any given 24-hour period, what percentage of all those updates from those 100 people do you actually look at? You know, in my very informal survey, it's usually around like 1%, and for me, it's way less than that. But there is a tool that works really, really well for permission. So social media is not permission. It does not equal permission. Permission, the first thing that I tell every author to do is to start building an email list. This is the current tool that works the best for getting permission to stay in contact with people. It is the most reliable way to get people's attention and drive action. Now, I want to go back and separate systems from tactics again. So the system is permission. We have to have a way to communicate with people that gets their attention and drive action. And what I'm telling you is the current tactic that works the best and has worked the best for years is your email list. This is the #1 thing I tell every author to do. In fact, I promised you I would share with you the #1 tool every author should be using to build their predictable book sales machine, and this is the one that is it, your email list. It is the best way to get attention and drive action. And I can give all kinds of advice on this, all kinds of reasons why this is true. But let me just give one little anecdotal thing before we move on. So one of the things that I've done to learn my craft is I've paid attention to a lot of internet marketing guru guys. Now, a lot of these guys, they're a little swarmy. You probably wouldn't want to do everything that they do, but they're really good at marketing online. So I try to learn from them and figure out how to do this stuff in the best way. Well, if you talk to any of these guys and you said, okay, I'm going to get 2 buckets. And in one bucket, I'm going to put your blog, your podcast, your Twitter following, your Facebook following, anybody that follows you on Pinterest, all your LinkedIn connections, your forum posts, everything you do online. And in the other bucket, I'm going to put your email list, right? So all the things you can do for online marketing, I'm going to put all of those except your email list in one bucket and your email list all by itself in another bucket, and say, okay, you can only choose one of those. They'll pick their email list because that's where they make their money. And if you actually watch what most people are doing that are doing this well, is they look at everything that they do as entryways to their email list, because that's where they know that they have permission. That's where they know they're going to get people's attention and drive action. So that's permission. So let's jump to content, the second part of the connection system. So what we want to do is we want to spread content freely and widely. We want to put a lot of content out into the world in a way that people can easily access, because this is how people get to know you. In today's world of all the content out there, you know, people want to interact with your content to know if you're a good fit for them. So whether it's putting out PDFs or guest posting or being a guest on a podcast, whatever it is, you know, you want to put content out in lots of different ways so that people can get to know your writing, get to know who you are. So again, the system is sharing content, and one of the tactics that I see lots and lots of people talk about is guest posting, so finding blogs and writing guest posts for it, and that can work really well. But again, that's just one tactic of many. You can start a blog, you can be on a podcast, you can put out ebooks, reports, white papers, guest posting, speaking, all kinds of different things. It doesn't matter. What you want to do is be putting content out in the world and spreading it as far as you can, because that's when people find your content, that's how they're going to know whether or not you're a good fit for them. So that's the second part, is you want to put content out and spread it freely and widely. And that actually dovetails into the third part of the connection system, which is outreach. Now, the definition of outreach is moving people from not knowing you exist to knowing you exist. And it's really important that you think of that definition only. So outreach is anything that is moving people from not knowing you exist to knowing you exist. So it is things like being a guest on a podcast, but it's anything that is getting you in front of people and moving them from not knowing you exist to knowing you exist. And a lot of times, content and outreach go hand in hand. So when we're spreading content freely and widely, a lot of times we're doing it by outreach. This webinar is one of those things. So a lot of you that are on this webinar have never heard of me before, right? So moving you from not knowing I exist to knowing I exist. And then I'm sharing a lot of content with you, hoping that it's a good fit. And then my goal is that you'll join my email list and give me permission to stay in contact with you long term. So you want to look for anywhere that your people are congregating, and then ask yourself, how can I show up there? So again, if you think about 2 angles to come at a problem, are we coming at systems or tactics? So a lot of times people will hear, again, back to guest posting, they'll hear this thing of like, every author should be guest posting, right? So you're out there, and instead of asking, where are my people congregating, you're asking, okay, where can I guest post? Well, that's completely going to miss all kinds of opportunities. But instead, if you think through, okay, who are potential readers of my book, and where are they congregating, both online and in the real world? Okay, how can I show up there? Should I speak at a conference? Should I guest post? Should I make a white paper available to them? Should I write a short story and put it on this website, because I know people that read that website love these types of books? So what we want to do for outreach is we want to find out where our people are congregating, and then we want to show up there. And so it does look like guest posting, guests on podcasts, speaking, webinars, teleseminars. These are all tactics, though. The main thing is we're looking for where our people are congregating, and we want to show up there. And so what I want to do is just look at the connection system as a whole now. And I'm going to flip it around. So we started talking about permission and content and outreach. But if you actually flip it around and look at it from the other angle, you start seeing how all of this stuff works together. So outreach is putting yourself in a position where people move from not knowing you exist to knowing you exist. But just knowing you exist is not quite good enough. We need to, get them interested in what we're doing. So we put out content in the world and we spread it freely and widely so that people can get to know who we are and what we're about and what kind of content we write and what kind of books we write. And then once we know they're a good fit, or once they know they're a good fit, we invite them to give us permission to stay in contact with us long term by joining our email list. And now we have a way that we're connected to them long term, and we can stay in contact with them, and we can do that relentlessly helpful thing where we're constantly adding value to their lives. But this starts building a foundation for your writing career that's going to last a really long time. Even the authors that see success with having huge launches, and again, I've seen behind the scenes, they'll go out and hire a publicist and they'll do all this stuff, and it'll be a big launch and they'll sell a lot of books, and then it kind of falls off. And in 2 years or 3 years when they come out with another book, they got to do all that work again to get all the same people, and what you find is it's harder and more expensive than ever. Well, this is looking at it from a completely different thing. What we want to do is find people and not just let them know we exist and buy a book right now. We want to get permission to stay in contact with them long term so that we'll actually be able to sell them this book and every other book. Again, this is why this is all about your long-term writing career and not just selling this book. I want to be somebody that is a writer and not somebody that wrote a book once. So then what I found is once you have them on an email list, it becomes pretty easy to sell your book. Once you're adding value to their lives on a regular basis, you can do a book launch and you know that you're going to sell books. You know that as people come down through this system, you're doing outreach, you're putting content out, you're inviting them to your email list. A certain percentage of those people are going to buy your book. And it's funny, I was actually talking with a friend of mine yesterday about this, and he's like, Tim, he's like, it's actually kind of depressing how numbers oriented it is. He's like, I know a certain number of percentage of people that join my email list are going to take this kind of action. And it's like, yeah, it just works. Like it's while there's nuances to it and there's always ways to do it better, there is just this way of okay, if I'm bringing people into my email list and I'm adding value to them and then I invite them to buy my books, it just works. You're able to sell books. So again, this is the exact same system I used to build Daniel Pink's platform and build my own platform and find success with both types of books. And so that's the connection system. Now, when I've done this webinar, I've taught this a few times, and some of the feedback I've gotten is I didn't go deep into tactics. And I hope I explained some of why I don't go too deep into tactics, but I know that tactics are helpful. You want to know what to do next. But I guarantee you don't want to sit and watch me click through how to set up a WordPress site or any of this kind of stuff. And so I actually have links to a bunch of different articles that will walk you through this stuff. So if you need to get your website set up and you don't know how, I have an article that walks you through it. If you want to start getting people on an email list and figure out how to get people on an email list by doing a giveaway, I got something on that. And how to get sign-up forms. Even that is even with how easy it is to get website stuff up now, it's really hard sometimes to get sign-up forms on your website. So I have a how-to on to do that. And then again, I have that social media article. So if through this you're like, okay, that's great, I'm supposed to have an email list, I have no idea how to do that, I'm going to help you with that. It's step-by-step walkthrough. That's way better to do on your own than watch me go through it in a very boring way. So that's going to be the next steps that I send you when you get the recording of this webinar as well. And so I want to just circle back around to Annie Murphy Paul. So again, she did everything she was supposed to do, major media, lots of speaking, social media, and it just didn't work. And so that's when she reached out to me. And now her book's coming out later this year. She has a huge email list of fans, thousands of people she's connected to. Every day people are asking her about her new book. She's connected to influencers that will help, and the biggest tell of all is she's constantly recommending me. And actually, when I told her, I was like, "Oh, I'd really like to, put your face in my slideshow and tell a little bit of your story." she's like, oh, I'd be honored to share, because she wants all the other authors to like have the same kind of success she's having. And what she's found is, for her next book, she's not scared anymore. She's excited about it because she knows that it's going to sell, because she's done all of these things. So there's no more like, I hope I get the media, I hope I get the speaking, I hope all this stuff lines up, I hope people will buy my book. It's like, oh, I'm already connected to my fans. I know I'm going to sell my book. So, so that's what the connection system is, and we're going to go into the Q&A now. And I actually left a little time. I'm like running right against the hour. So really, ask anything. Don't be shy. I'm up to answer pretty much anything. So any kind of questions you have, I'm happy to answer and dive deeper on anything that I talked about.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's very helpful. For those of you that are watching live, you can go ahead and type in your questions on the chat. And I'm also going to bring in the students from the University of Washington Business of Digital Publishing class, and they are welcome to ask questions as well. And as I do that, let's start with the first question from Alan. I'm a new author with one book on the market, hitting a few ranks on Amazon. I have near 200 people on a growing email list, but I've only sent out one newsletter via MailChimp. How else can I connect to those I have outside of newsletters?
So a couple things I would say there. So one of the things I like to think about, because so many authors are in this place where they come out with a book, but they don't have a platform yet. And so what I try to get them to think about now is not so much how can I sell as many books, as many copies as this book as possible, but how can I use this book to build my platform? And sometimes some authors have trouble kind of getting over that hurdle of thinking, but what happens is you'll sell books anyway, but it changes kind of your paradigm of what you're doing, and now your book becomes kind of this weapon that you can do marketing with. So an example was one of my when my book came out, I sold those first 1,000 copies, but then like if you actually look at my book sales, they started just tanking. So I sold 1,000 in the first couple weeks to 1,500 in the first like 5 weeks, and then it just started ratcheting down, like 500, then 400, then 300 books, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so I kind of
Tim, can you turn off your screen share so we can see your face?
Yes, I can totally figure out how to do that. Hold on. Okay, can you see me now?
Yeah.
All right. So, and so what I started doing is looking at how can I use my book to get out into the world, and what I found was that just being a published author makes a really big difference. Now, I did this, and lots of authors do this, where they'll kind of talk themselves out of this because they're like, well, I'm just a self-published author or whatever. But it's like, if you look at yourself as now an expert and a writer, you can have all kinds of doors open for you. So like, for instance, I had tried to speak at South by Southwest for 5 years and gotten turned down. And after I came out with a book, I got invited to speak. And so what I would do is start looking at, how can I use the fact that I'm now a published author to open doors that were previously closed? What conferences will have me come and speak? What podcasts will have me come and interview? What are different angles that I can take? And then as far as your email list, I actually just finished up like a week and a half book launch crash course, and I talked about this a lot. And when my book came out, I sent 8 emails in 2 weeks. I think less than 2 weeks, which was a ton of emails. But what I focused on was, in each email, I didn't just promote my book. I gave away content, or I did something fun, or I did something valuable, or again, tried to be relentlessly helpful. And what I found is, as long as I'm sharing something interesting, as long as I'm trying to do something that I think they'll enjoy, people can get a lot of email. I had a friend that when you first signed up for his email list, you got an email every single day for 30 days. And some people would unsubscribe because it was too much. But the point was, he sent lots of valuable content, and people would read it all. And so what I would say is, feel free to share and look for anything that, and if you're struggling with what to write about, I just look for anything that you're finding interesting and valuable in the world. Dan Pink, one of the things he does, so he writes, these nonfiction, businessy type books, but one of his most popular things he does for his email list is send out 5 of his favorite novels of the last 6 months. Just anything that he's finding interesting, articles he's found online. He just looks for any reason to add value to the people that are on his email list. So that's what I recommend that you do, is start using that book to do outreach, to start getting out into the world, and then also don't be afraid to email your list on a regular basis and just look for interesting things that you probably already have going on. I keep a running list in Evernote of potential blog post ideas, and I just keep adding to it. I got this idea from Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy. He keeps a Word document with ideas for Dilbert columns, so when he sits down on a deadline, he can just pick one of them and start doing the comic strip. And so I do the same thing. I just keep a running list of questions I've been asked, or things I find interesting, or problems I've had or been able to figure out to solve, and those are just content that I create and send out to my email list.
That's great. In the example that you had of that science fiction Amish writer, what was he offering that was relentlessly helpful? What kind of content can someone like that doing fiction genre that's not a guide, that's not nonfiction, what's the offer?
Well, so one of the things he does is he talks about other books that he enjoys. So, and this is a great mix of, so there's all kinds of, again, tactical things you can do, and one of the things I love is, if you're wanting to connect with other big-name authors and you're wanting to create content for your own platform, review their books. Read their books and review them on your website. That's a great way to, a great reason to send them an email and say, hey, I loved your book, I posted it on my website. They don't know nobody's reading your website. And so it's a great way to connect with them, and it's a great way to start building up content that you can then send out to your email list. So that's one of the things he does. He shares content. He shares what he's learning as a writer. So anytime new things come on that he's done, or new ideas, or where he's at on his books and what he's learning on his books, that's the kind of stuff he's sending out. So one of the switches I always try to get people to make is from this idea of I learned this when I went through this 6-month period where I seemed to only work with journalists from New York, right? And so, and they're kind of in this mindset of I get a assignment and then I write it. So I either get hired to write an article for such and such magazine, or I get sent to cover this event, or I get a book, I get a book deal or whatever it is, but I get assigned a writing gig and then I write it. Well, we want to flip that around. Instead, we want to look at our life as something we can constantly pull things to write about from. We don't want to turn this into I had a burrito for lunch. But as writers, we are constantly learning things. We're constantly looking for new ideas. We're constantly reading, which means we're constantly having new things come across our path. And if you find it interesting, other people are going to find it interesting as well. And so I would say the best way to do this is to just constantly look at, how can I add value? It doesn't have to be your book. And in fact, I'm working on my own fiction book right now, and I've mentioned it to my email list a couple times, and I've gotten all these emails excited about reading my fiction book. Now, if you stop and think through that logically, that makes no sense, okay? I've never written fiction before. I wrote the entire thing in a month for NaNoWriMo. It's probably going to suck, okay? There's a lot better books you could go out there and buy, but because they're fans of me, they're wanting to be involved in everything that I'm doing. So, even though they sign up for my email list to get tips on book marketing, they're interested in my fiction work as well because they're fans of me first. And that's because I don't just talk about book marketing, I talk about all kinds of things that will add value to people's lives.
Some of the write-in questions, one from Gail that is similar to another one from Faith. They're very interested in the email marketing, and they want to know about how often can they send out newsletters, and how do you keep engaged between book launches if you're not simply talking about newsletters. I think you went over this, but maybe reiterate.
No, that's fine. So again, there's no rule, but let me give you a rule to start with. So if you're struggling with what to send out to your list, so let's say you get your list set up, and again, in one of the articles I send you, I'm going to talk about how to get your list set up and how to get your first 100 subscribers. So you get your first 100 subscribers, you're like, okay, well, what do I send to them? So if you can't figure it out, let me give you a plan, okay? You're going to send an email to them the first and third Tuesday of every month, okay? The first email of the month, the first Tuesday, you're going to send just some kind of content to help them out, right? Again, your 5 favorite novels of the past 6 months, 5 interesting articles you found, this new habit you've been trying for the last 30 days that's gotten you up at 5 a.m. to do your writing, whatever. Just try to add value to their lives. Something you found interesting and exciting, share it with them. Then the second Tuesday of every month, send a writer update. So this is where my current book is at. This is what my last book is doing. It's been out 6 months. It just got this award, or it was just reviewed over here. I'm speaking at this conference in 2 months. Whatever it is, it's just an author update because people signed up for your email list. They want to know about you. And so what that will do is that gives you 24 emails in 1 year that you can send. 12 of them are really easy to write because they're just updates on you, and the other 12, you only have to come up with 12 kind of original content things. And so again, I go through all kinds of spikes and valleys. So there's times where I'm completely inundated and I only get maybe 1 email out to my list every couple of weeks. But then right now I'm sending 6 over the course of like 8 or 9 days because I'm focusing on that. And so it can ebb and flow. But that's, if you're like, okay, I have no idea where to start, first and third Tuesday of every month, send an email. The first one's content, the second one's an update on what you're working on.
That's great. And another write-in question from Sarah. She wants to know, can she share content from her blog, or should she always write something new?
So one of the those kind of hard truths that I always share with people is nobody's paying attention to your stuff near as much as you are. And so I constantly look for ways to reuse content. In fact, about this time last year, I had an assistant go back through all these blog posts that I've written and find ones that had evergreen content. So content that still is relevant. And I had her send those to my editor. She kind of cleaned them up because I wrote most of them when I didn't have an editor. And then I posted them all on my website as free PDFs under the resource section. So they're both on my blog and online as resources. And a lot of times I use them to promote other things. So just an email I'm sending either today or tomorrow, I'm linking to a book launch journal I created 2 years ago. So I'm always looking. It's both. I'm creating new content, but I'm also looking for ways to reuse content. This webinar, I think this is the 7th time I've done this webinar, so I don't feel like I have to, every time I do something, create something new, but at the same time, I'm just, I try to balance that. But, if you put content on your blog and then post similar content to your email list, even if people notice, they won't even care. They'll be happy to read your content, but most people won't even notice.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
So you cited some statistics at the beginning of your talk. The average book will sell about 250 copies. So using your system, what would be a reasonable number to gauge success? I mean, obviously more than 250, but could you maybe update that number for people who are going to try to put this to practice?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit more about that 250 number. So people kind of wonder why that's the number, and here's my guess and what I've seen kind of out in the world is most of us know enough people to sell a couple hundred copies. Like if we bug all our friends and colleagues and family, we can sell a couple hundred copies in the first year. But when you hit 1,000 copies, you've done something interesting, right? So you've gone outside of your immediate network and you've convinced about 750 people that don't know you to buy your book. And so that's actually where the name of my book came from, Your First 1,000 Copies, because that's kind of the first goal I want people to reach towards. Because if they can move from 250 copies to 1,000 copies, they're doing something. You're doing something to convince people that don't know you to buy your book, and that's what's really important. One of my clients, what he's always had trouble with is he has this small group of people that will buy anything he comes out with, but he only talks to them. He never tries to get kind of people outside of that core audience to buy anything. And so everything he comes out with has this very low ceiling to what it will do, because he's just kind of focused on this small group of people. And so what I want to do is like, okay, I need people that don't know who I am, that don't have a personal connection with me, to put down money and buy my book. And so that's what this is kind of about, where, like, you know, we want people to hear about us somewhere, read a blog post, sign up for our email list, and buy a book, and that's almost completely automated. And so that's what we got to get to. So the 1,000 copies is kind of that first milestone. If I can sell 1,000 copies, and I can do it, you know, in the first month or month to 6 months, I'm doing something. And so now I can see some things that are starting to work and starting to build up, and I can kind of double down on those and see it grow. You know, these things, as I see, they kind of start growing. You know, your first 100 email subscribers are relatively easy, but getting to 500 is a slog, and then getting to 1,000 is a little bit easier, then getting to 2,500 is a little bit easier. You know, like it starts, you just start getting the hang of things. So that 1,000 people is the first mark. That's an important mark.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else from the students? It's 1 o'clock. We got to let them go. So get in your burning questions right now. Last chance. So Tim, what's the name of your fiction novel?
The Drekken.
It's
still. I don't want to talk about it. It's horrible. Like, well, it's funny because like when I came out with my book, and actually if you go into my website to the resources section, the thing I referenced, the book launch journal, is there, and it's actually the journal I kept for like a few weeks leading up to my book launch, and I was not planning on releasing it. Like a client of mine was like, hey, you should just write down everything you're dealing with, and I'm like, okay. So, and then after my book came out, I had all these people saying, oh, you must have felt so confident, you know, you're the book marketing guy, and I'm like, I was freaking out, you know. So I released it as a PDF so everybody could see it, and it was this really good exercise for me, because all of a sudden all these things that like I used to like get really frustrated at my clients about, all of a sudden I understood what they were going through, and I don't get as mad anymore. And so the same thing's going for fiction, of like as I like am trying to get this book out into the world, it's like, oh man, it's so hard like to even like talk about. And you know, it's one thing to talk about a book that's like you know, about book marketing, but to talk about a book that like has wizards and stuff in it, it's just kind of weird. So I'm still getting used to it. So hopefully in the next couple months, it's getting edited now, and I'm going to get out as soon as I can.
Hopefully you have a great editor. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in. I did put the link to timgrahl.com/resources in the chats. And I invite everyone to go look. I've already gone over there and signed up for about 3 different things. And that's all. Thank you very much, Tim. Oh, and
right.
one last thing for everyone else who's watching. Tonight we have Eileen Gittins, the CEO of Blurb. We'll be talking about publishing trends. And then right after her, Guy Kawasaki is talking about indie publishing and entrepreneurial publishing. So I hope to see you guys there. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for having me.